In the world of food, there are only so many dishes that just about everyone knows. From Indian curries to burgers and fries, these are more than cuisine, they're cultural icons. But almost none has a definitive point of origin, one town or city where we can go to see to this day exactly how and why it came to be. But in the Vietnamese countryside, there's a place called Van Cu, said to be the birthplace of pho. It's a small town, just a dot on the map in northeast Vietnam, but here, at least according to legend, more than 100 years ago, the first bowls would be served of what would become the national dish. Today, we're unexpected visitors, dropping into a quiet village that's long been forgotten, even while its famous creation has taken over the world. We're here to find out just what actually happened, what the real story is behind pho, and if we can still find traces of its legacy here in Van Cu. And most of all, we just want to know what pho tastes like in the place the family that came up with the recipe still calls home.
Đây đúng nhà quê luôn. Đúng cổ luôn.
Đúng cổ luôn.
Đúng cổ thôi, không phải cò.
Đúng phở cổ à?
Đúng cổ đấy, tức là đúng cổ luôn.
This is pho, a rice noodle soup that today is one of the most popular dishes on the entire planet, available almost everywhere and part of any food trip to Southeast Asia. Its story is full of controversy and speculation, but in its home region, well, it begins around the end of the 19th century, just after the French completed their colonization of northern Vietnam. They took over a region of rough terrain, rice farming, and few natural resources, and while their interest in the country was more focused on the south, they needed to make some use of this new land, so they built factories, making silk and other textiles. In need of cheap workers and access to the port, the factories would be centered in Nam Dinh City, directly between Hanoi and the ocean. Thousands of migrants from the countryside would arrive in search of work, and along with them, a new economy would form. More peasants flocking to the city to cater to the workers with goods, services, and food served fast and cheap. And among those peasants, a family from nearby Van Cu, serving a dish that would become a sensation. Now, it's not clear whether Mr. and Mrs. Co brought pho from Van Cu in its modern form, or if it took shape in Nam Dinh. According to some stories, what they first served was another rice noodle soup known as ban da cua, made with crabs harvested from the Van Cu rice fields. Others say it began as a pork bone stock, and still more say it was sao chow, a soup like pho made from water buffalo, but regardless, soon enough it would look very much like it does today, with the Co family adapting their recipe to use the beef bones discarded by a nearby French butcher shop. This would be revolutionary. See, to that point, beef was almost never consumed in Vietnam. Cows were considered work animals most commonly used to plow rice fields, and their meat was a delicacy, rare and expensive. But as pho gained popularity, the Co family shared the recipe with others from Van Cu, who soon enough dominated the Nam Dinh street food scene. In 1898, construction would begin on the Long Bien Bridge in Hanoi, the national capital, and thousands of workers from the Nam Dinh factories would be moved north to help on that project. The vendors who supplied their meals would come along, and by the early 20th century, well, pho would be among the city's most popular foods, referred to in the beginning as Pho Van Cu. But that was a long time ago.
Well, it's been a very long time since we've done a shoot where I have had as little idea what's coming as I do today. I don't know what's coming, but we're on the hunt for the origins of one of the world's most famous foods, and it's supposedly just right up ahead.
The village of Van Cu is about 100 kilometers south of Hanoi, in the rice farming region near the Gulf of Tonkin. It should have been an easy drive starting just before the sunrise, but I got us lost. Though in fairness, there are a ton of places called Van Cu in the Red River Delta. But there's only one that's the home of pho.
I don't know what's going to happen, but we're on the way to a village called Van Cu. Van Cu. The way I was pronouncing it earlier this morning off camera apparently means thank you, grandfather. Yeah, Van Cu village in the sort of the outskirts of a city called Nam Dinh in northern Vietnam is where they say pho comes. How do you say pho? That's pho. Yeah, okay, that was correct.
We didn't plan on doing this story. We're actually here in the Vietnamese countryside because we came to visit another village north of here and cover a place called Don Duc and its Michelin chef Kim Do. But while we were rolling tape, the topic of pho came up, because in Vietnam it always does, and we all realized we weren't that far from Van Cu. None of us have been here. We couldn't find anything online or any YouTube videos or anything indicating that it even still exists. But then we started driving and somehow, well, there we were.
Well, we are taking our first steps into Van Cu village. There's a couple signs that this is going to be a harder shoot than we expected, mainly because everyone's looking at us like we're crazy. But there's also a faded, massive sign up that we drove under a few minutes ago that said Pho Festival in Vietnamese. We know for a fact that we are in the right place. We've just found a place to park the car. It's really narrow roads and old buildings, quiet, you know. I mean, I'm standing in the middle of the street and like, you can't do that in Hanoi and tape an introduction. We have our friends from last night, which is why all of us are feeling so bad. We were singing karaoke about 6 hours ago. But yeah, so this is supposedly the entrance to the village that's the home of beef pho, which was the first form ever made. And yeah, let's have a walk around and see what we find. Thanks for coming on the adventure with me. Let's take a walk.
Our first steps into Van Cu felt like any other small Vietnamese town. It was quiet and peaceful with a lazy local market, but what we didn't see were signs of pho. Nobody seemed to understand why we were here, but at least a quick stop to buy some water told us that we hadn't completely wasted a trip.
So we've been pointed in a direction. At least we know that there is some pho to be found. So we're not. It's not a complete loss, that's for sure. This is really cool.
Đất trồng rau và trồng xốp kìa. Đây.
God, look at these trees, how well maintained those are. Oh, I'm right next door. Amazing.
Yeah. Bán phở chị? Anh, ở đây bán phở bò. À vâng. You want to eat noodle soup?
Yeah, of course. That's what we're here for. We're right at the end already of breakfast service. It's like 8:15 in the morning, but yeah, here we go.
Mà đi sớm đi.
Our first bowl of pho in Van Cu.
140 bát ạ. Tái nạm gầu. Anh có nhà vệ sinh em nhờ tí.
All right, now the first thing we need to explain is that here in Van Cu, pho has a very specific meaning. What we're talking about is this, Pho Bo, or beef pho. In spite of the shared name, original pho is a completely different dish than the one made with chicken. And in Vietnam, the beef version is king, the original style, and the one with roots in Van Cu. Now, at its core, pho is simple, just a few components that work together in perfect harmony. It starts by grilling beef bones to bring out the most flavor, then simmering them for up to half a day along with sea salt, fish sauce, charred onion and ginger, and sa sung, the secret ingredient, dried peanut worms which add a touch of umami. When it's ready, the broth is served in a bowl with flat rice noodles, a few herbs like coriander and mung bean sprouts, and then slices of raw beef, which cook just a touch in the hot soup. That's all there is to it, at least for the original version said to come from Van Khu. In 1954, when Vietnam was divided in half, about 1 million Northerners moved south and brought pho with them, where along the way it would pick up new spices and aromatics: cinnamon, cardamom, and sugar, hoisin and chili sauce, and more fresh herbs, and this would be the version taken abroad when Southern refugees fled after the Vietnam War. But here in Van Khu, we came for the original stuff, the dish as it was meant to be, just as it was served in the very beginning.
Giờ là nó đúng là ba đời, nhưng mà có điều là nói vậy, nhưng mà phở thì cái gì cũng vậy, nó phải là giữ được cái nguồn gốc ông cha mà để lại, là mình phải làm sao truyền cho mình làm sao mình phải theo đúng cái công thức như vậy thì nó mới ngon được. Nhưng mà bây giờ thì để mà khẳng định là phở như các vùng xa là thất truyền đấy. Như chúng tôi đây là tôi vẫn giữ được cái gốc của quê hương của ông cha truyền lại đấy. Thứ nhất là ví dụ như cái phở thịt trâu, bây giờ ngày xưa thì nói bò thì giá trâu giá bò, bò giá trâu, nhưng như ngày trước ấy là bò là có nghĩa là nếu trâu nhưng giá bò, nhưng bây giờ là bò là giá trâu đấy, bây giờ nó như vậy đấy, tí anh em ăn thì biết phở thôi, là nó đúng là mình cái thương hiệu đúng là lâu lắm. Ngay như bản thân tôi là ít tuổi nhưng mà tôi trong nghề của tôi đã gần 45 trong nghề, ăn chỉ quanh đấy. Anh em ăn thì cho long là mất.
The noodles are amazing too. So light.
I don't know if it was the pho or the experience of actually being here, but this was a perfect breakfast. A savory broth with incredibly fresh meat and noodles made in the village. It was exactly what we were hoping for. But it didn't tell us much about the history. See, the owner isn't actually from Van Khu. He moved here from the other side of Nam Dinh because he wanted to learn how to make what his family told him was the best pho anywhere. So to understand more about the village and the origins of pho, we figured we should head further into Van Khu to find our next meal. All right, so we are in downtown Van Khu, the Times Square, if you will, of this village. And what the shop owner, where we just started, told us was that there's not that many pho stores here anymore because just was no business. You know, it's a small village. But we're gonna walk around. I saw a couple places at least selling meat, and I'm curious whether that means they also sell soup. But if nothing else, this is a really cool, very rural local market that doesn't see a lot of outsiders, that's for sure. The village of Van Khu today is home to around 1,000 people, mostly subsistence farmers, and the cook at the first restaurant told us most of the remaining pho vendors only sell before the sunrise, because after that pretty much the whole village is out in the fields. I'm not trying to say that I expected a pho theme park or anything like that, but I will admit to being surprised at how surprised everyone else was to see us here. It was almost like, wait, you came here on purpose? Why? I guess I hadn't really considered that every part of the Van Khu story takes place somewhere else. The factories in Nam Dinh and the construction sites in Hanoi, and I wonder if Van Khu itself ever actually saw any benefit from its famous dish, or if pho was just its gift to the world. There's also another factor in why so few people come here, which is that the Van Khu story pretty much only exists in history books. If you just run a quick Google search today, even in Vietnamese, you'll find a lot of stories, but very few even mention this place. Instead, the credit goes elsewhere, to different cultures and countries ranging from nearby to the other side of the world. The first alternative theory comes from Hanoi, the city where pho became famous. According to some local writers, pho was in the capital centuries before the Long Bien Bridge, or at least a pho precursor, made with water buffalo and laksa leaves. Now that is, of course, a different soup, but the theory is based around one important factor, which is that in traditional pho, The noodles are cut by hand from a sheet of rice paper, a technique which does have ancient roots in Tan Tri, the section of Hanoi best known as the home of Ban Quan. Now, this is just a guess, and it's just as likely that Tan Tri noodles found their way to Van Khu long before the creation of pho, but what does cause some problems isn't the cooking technique. It's the name pho, a word that's not Vietnamese and first shows up only in connection with the dish. That brings us to another modern theory that doesn't mention Hanoi or Van Khu, but rather the French themselves, and specifically a dish called pot au feu, a favorite of the colonists and something that explains the name, the use of beef, and also the charred onion, something found nowhere else in old Vietnamese cuisine. It's important to remember that during the years of occupation, Vietnamese people were banned from eating French food, which means there are plenty of examples of locals adapting colonial dishes in new ways. See our video on the banh mi for an obvious example. It's a compelling theory, but the issue here is that the French themselves never mentioned it. And they certainly knew pho, writing of the dish at length and even introducing it to Paris under the name soupe tonkinoise, which leaves one other possibility, and that's a Chinese point of origin, specifically tied to a Cantonese soup called New York Phan, or beef soup with rice noodles. This is today the most widely accepted explanation of pho for a few reasons. First, that other unrelated dish, pho ga, or chicken pho, well, that is Cantonese, an exact recipe brought from across the border. And the general concept of noodle soups were very much a Chinese introduction, not just into Vietnamese cuisine, but everywhere in Southeast Asia. The story goes that vendors used to sell New York Phan on the streets while shouting, New York Phan or beef with rice noodles are here. Over time, that became shortened to Nu Phan then Phan then pho. Now, all of these theories are just guesses based on logic instead of evidence. But it does make you wonder how, if it really did come from here, the name and techniques actually developed. And while we might never know the answer, it is worth mentioning that in the 1890s, when the story of pho begins, well, there was one part of Vietnam that saw an influx of French, Cantonese, and workers from Hanoi all at once. And that wasn't Saigon or the capital. It was here, in the southern part of the Red River Delta, where the trade in rice and textiles created a melting pot that might just have given rise to a brand new dish. In other words, the Van Khu story is not just plausible, it's the only one that actually could explain everything. And that brings us to our next bowl of pho. There's only one pho shop we could find open in what's left of downtown Van Khu. This is it. Out of what 100 years ago was said to be dozens, at least today it's just this, surrounded by empty shop fronts and a village half abandoned. The husband and wife who opened this shop are Van Khu locals, born and raised just steps away and in the good days operating their business with the help of their 5 children. But the kids have moved on, as apparently most of the young people did, leaving to earn a better living in Nam Dinh or the capital, Hanoi. Today they're the last ones left, still serving traditional pho from the house where they once raised their family.
Đây là đúng phở của tôi là tôi không có một cái gì là cái hóa chất cả. Đấy, ngoài ra tức là đúng theo cổ truyền các cụ là xương nhà tôi thì ít làm xương bò lắm. Đấy, là toàn xương lợn, là toàn những cái cúc của cái bộ xương của lợn này làm ra. Và ngoài ra là chỉ có tức là gừng, rồi hành, rồi quế, thảo quả, cánh hỏi. Đấy, bằng cái thứ thì mình làm sao với này. Mắm là phải nước mắm biển nghiêm chỉnh chứ không nước mắm hóa chất, tức là không có một cái gì cái hóa chất cả. Đấy.
I think it's great. You can tell he spent his whole life. He's been making this for what, half a century?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ông năm nay 80.
Chưa, mới 71,
He's only 70.
năm 54,
Is he from here?
Dốc Ngọ.
Vâng. Ông sinh ra ở đây luôn ạ.
Sinh ra đây luôn và luôn ở bám trụ đất này tức là từ bé đến giờ, khai sinh đến giờ. Đi bộ đội về từ năm 71, 81. Đấy, xong bắt đầu về là năm 86 bắt đầu là mở hàng, tức là nó còn gọi là phọt phẹt bình dân thôi. Đến giờ là cứ cố gắng khắc phục mãi, đến giờ là nuôi ấy rồi xây dựng con cái trưởng thành, rồi còn có hai ông bà coi cố gắng để khắc phục để no đến bản thân, để không phải phiền hà đến con cái. Thực tế vậy.
Anh muốn hỏi là cái chỗ này ngày xưa nó như thế nào?
Ngày xưa cái chỗ này là nó là cái gọi là cái bờ bãi, bờ hoang, bờ yếc, cái gọi này nó trước đây nó khó khăn lắm. Trước đây tôi về bộ đội là xây dựng gia đình ấy, là còn đang là hoang vắng, nó như một cái bãi ấy thôi. Thế là khai phá rồi xây dựng nên đến bây giờ đấy là như vậy. Tôi không có một cái gì mà cũng không nhờ vả một cái gì giúp đỡ. Còn về cái xã hội thì tôi gọi là được tí chế độ ưu đãi về bảo hiểm thôi, chứ còn không được cái gì cả. Đấy, còn thôi đi bộ đội là đời thời giờ khó khăn thì lúc bây giờ là nhà dột vách nát, thế là xã hội người ta cũng gọi là ưu tiên cho được mấy cái trăm ngói để nộp ở trên cái nhà này thôi. Bây giờ hãy giữ tồn tại gì à.
Von Khu might be a place with a deep connection to food history, but if you didn't know that already, you'd drive past without ever having any idea. Whatever development that's changed life in northern Vietnam has pretty much bypassed this part of the map, and today, according to the census, the most common occupation for locals is selling pho. But not here, rather as migrant workers in Hanoi. We didn't catch it on camera, but when we were filming in the kitchen of the last restaurant, the chef actually apologized, telling us that he wished he could serve us pho as his parents used to make it, cooked over a wood fire with fresh noodles sliced by hand and the very best cuts of beef. But the problem is those methods involve higher costs, and the local people are so poor that nobody could afford to buy it. So the vendors now sell pho with cheaper ingredients at a price suited for the village, between about 60 and 80 cents per portion. The people of Von Khu priced out of the dish their ancestors are said to have invented. Today, a walk around Von Khu doesn't feel like visiting somewhere with a long and proud history. More like anywhere else on Earth where the jobs long ago went away and all that's left is crumbling infrastructure and not much to do for tourists or locals.
70.
70 ạ?
Này, vitamin cây cay này.
Vitamin beer.
Now, this is not meant to be a tragic story. For someone like Kim, who grew up in the 1980s in a Vietnamese village, places like Von Khu are throwbacks, preserved relics to how the countryside used to be, few and far between as the nation has transformed and modernized. But still, this feels all wrong, as everyone, everywhere has learned about pho, showing up in movies and television shows, eaten by American presidents and foreign celebrities and served in thousands and thousands of restaurants around the world. It doesn't seem right for its legacy to just disappear without a trace from the village where it was first invented. Every year, millions of tourists pour into Vietnam looking for the very best food. They jam the streets of Hanoi and Saigon, Hue and Hoi An, eating pho at countless trend-setting restaurants, while the dish disappears from Von Khu because the locals can't afford it. I guess the nature of food is that when something takes off, chefs and business owners aren't as concerned with preserving history as just meeting public demand. Then over time, as more and more stores and restaurants get involved, the credit goes to the people with money or a famous reputation. The places with a budget for marketing and SEO, the ones profiled in the Michelin Guide and the Lonely Planet. Tourists follow the pins with the best reviews or the ones from YouTube clips or Netflix specials, and I'm not saying nobody cares who came first. It's just that that isn't enough to penetrate the modern media landscape, especially for a poor farming backwater. Maybe in the grand scheme of things it doesn't even matter. By now you can get a bowl of pho at a high level in a lot of different places, and they don't require a road trip deep into the countryside. But it does matter here, as visitors might be the only chance to preserve not just Van Khu Pho, but the village itself. In spite of a couple good meals, we left Van Khu a little disheartened, ready to go back to Hanoi and try to figure out how to tell this story. But as we were leaving, we found something we didn't expect. A long strip of shops selling traditional pho, and a small community devoted to keeping the old legacy alive. Outside the gates of Van Khu, there's a road called 490C, which separates the village from its two neighbors. In the 1890s, this was the road, or at least the path, that once connected Van Khu to the textile factories in Nam Dinh, and the one the Ko family would have taken each morning on their way to sell their specialty to the workers. Along this street today, there's life. Shop fronts and businesses and restaurants serving pho, and by some stroke of good luck, some impossible fluke of circumstances, well, we found ourselves walking into a place at random, which just happens to serve a recipe passed down from the Ko family themselves.
Ôi đây có phải là phở Vân Cổ?
Đúng rồi, phở làng Vân Cù.
Vâng.
Phở Cổ làng Vân Cù.
Cô mở lâu chưa?
Quán của cô
Vâng.
thì cô về đây ý, thì ông bố chồng ông ấy lại giao cho.
Vâng.
Xong bắt đầu là cô làm cũng ngót 30 năm nay rồi.
Vâng. Nhưng mà trước đấy thì
trước đấy là đời ông, đời cha mình nữa. Thì
vâng, chắc khoảng 3-4 đời.
thì mình cũng không hiểu rõ.
Vâng.
Thì mình chỉ biết là ông bố mình cũng bảo là trước ngày ấy là ông nội làm, xong rồi chuyển cho ông bố chồng lại chuyển cho mình là con dâu với lại con trai làm.
Vâng.
Thế cô làm mót 30 năm nay rồi.
Alright, I'm gonna be completely honest and admit that there were two reasons behind the idea to do this shoot. One, I mean, this is a food history channel and it's a pretty obvious choice, but two, I don't really like pho. Well, that's not fair. Whenever I have it, I do enjoy it, but it's just, this is Asia, and to me, there are so many bigger flavors, more interesting things out there than a simple bowl of noodle soup. So I wanted to see if I could have something that might change my mind, to make the obsession over this dish finally make sense. And here at this random shop on the side of the road, well, mission accomplished. I'm sorry, I was wrong. It turns out that when you take the time to prepare each ingredient, no corners cut, following old techniques, the result is something where the whole is so much greater than the sum of the parts. This is just one of the best things I've ever had. Every day this shop sells around 800 bowls of pho, priced between 98 cents and $1.20 depending on the cuts of meat. Like the old stalls that once served the factory workers, the restaurant opens in the middle of the night and closes for the day just after lunchtime, serving meals to people whose grandparents once bought their pho from the owner's grandparents. Back when that generation used to run shops like this, Phan Cu was still well known. In the days before 1954, when this was still a regional dish, everyone knew the name of this village. But while that hasn't been the case in a long time, there are people like the owner here who are trying to put it back on the map. In 2022, after years of lobbying, Nam Dinh's Board of Tourism organized the first ever Phan Cu Pho Festival. There wasn't much marketing, but crowds did come, at least from the nearby city, and there are plans to turn it into an annual event. That same year saw the creation of a kind of union, the Phan Cu Pho Club, made up of those who traced their lineage back to those first sellers. In that case, the intent wasn't so much to bring people here as it was to control the use of the name, to certify the few remaining venues, places like this, which still use the authentic original recipe.
Cháu muốn hỏi là nãy thì cháu có vào trong làng Vân Cù ăn hai tô phở rồi, nhưng thật ra là cháu thấy cái phở nó không được đặc sắc lắm. Thì đến quán cô thì ăn rất là ngon, các khách ăn khen rất là ngon. Nhưng mà ý cháu muốn hỏi là khi người ta được công nhận cái đấy thì nhà nước có hỗ trợ để bảo tồn cái đặc sản đấy không? Ví dụ họ xây dựng một cái nhà ấy để làm phở và phải làm đúng như ngày xưa, ninh bằng nước phở bằng củi, thái bằng tay, bò làm như nào giống như ngày xưa để bảo tồn cái văn hóa không?
Nhà nước bây giờ ấy là người ta năm nào người ta cũng mở một cái cuộc coi như thế là lễ hội, coi là lễ hội về phở đấy, nhưng mà cái củi ấy, là bây giờ là cái cổ truyền ngày xưa cách đây hàng trăm năm nay rồi là người ta bỏ, nhưng người ta chỉ hầm bằng bếp than, còn tráng bánh là bằng tay, với lại sái bánh bằng tay như thế này thôi, là nhưng mà năm nào người ta cũng mở.
Nhưng người ta làm trong vòng bao lâu hay là
trong một ngày?
Trong một ngày.
Giả sử như một ngày là làm người ta mở hội, còn thì người ta chuẩn bị thì người ta phải chuẩn bị trong mấy ngày.
Maybe coming to Phan Cu didn't provide us with any proof about the real origins of pho. We can't end the debate about who made it first or where the idea came from, but what we did find is some incredible versions of the stuff. Recipes not from any cookbooks, but passed down through the generations. The pride and identity of one small town on the edge of nowhere that might not have the tourist infrastructure of other parts of Vietnam. But that's all right. This isn't a holiday, it's a pilgrimage. At the very least, to have some of the world's best soup. In 1934, as nationalists in Hanoi plotted to kick out the French, to rally the public, they knew they'd need to create a sense of Vietnamese identity, to show the world and their own people that this was a strong country with its own culture, and it deserved to chart its own path forward. One of the movement's leaders was a poet named Pho Bo, and to advance the cause, he published a work called Pho Duc Tung, or An Ode to Pho. Now, I'm not confident in my attempt at a translation, but to the best of my ability, it goes a bit like this. Among the dishes that belong to gentlemen, pho is a precious gift in this world. It's not expensive, but it's full of flavor. Sweet, rich, fragrant, fatty, and healthy. The noodles, the beef, the fatty broth, sprigs of herbs and topped with onion. Add fish sauce, pepper, vinegar, and chili. You can smell it in the air, touching all of you and making you hungry. Rich and poor, ask anyone who's tried it if they don't like it. It satisfies the teacher, the boatman, poets, and performers, and it makes the women more beautiful. Pho is a great medicine, as good as 10 doses of Chinese medicine, and Chinese herbs have nothing on this. Pho nourishes the yin and yang, the body's vital organs in all 8 meridians. For the workers without much money, pho is healing. And for the royal family, even with everything, without pho, their meals are not complete. Don't look down on pho. After all, even Paris had to accept it, side by side with the high-class food of all nations. If you live without pho, you're a fool. And in death, you must leave it as an offering. Now go have some pho, or you shall crave it soon.
tất cả các bạn trên thế giới về làng Vân Cù chúng tôi ăn phở. Quán phở nổi tiếng là cái Lôi làm ra phở và cũng làm ra bánh phở đi khắp miền đất nước và đi sang tất cả các thế giới, như là làng Vân Cù chúng tôi đã sang bên cả Mỹ nữa rồi đấy. Và mời các bạn đến quán tại Rau Cù, phố Rau Cù, xã Đồng Sơn, huyện Nam Trực để thưởng thức quán phở của nhà tôi, cũng là nguồn gốc của phở mà ra. Xin chào tất cả mọi người.
Very good. See you doing very good.
Mời tất cả thế giới về ăn phở Vân Cù, Đồng Sơn, Lam Định.
Để thưởng thức xem là phở ngon đến mức độ nào.
Thưởng thức phở ngon như nào nhá.
Trên thế giới về để ăn phở Vân Cù. Vân Cù.
Vâng, tôi cũng xin mời mọi người về làng Cù để phục vụ, để thưởng thức bát phở của cổ truyền của Rau Cù nha. Vâng.
Okay. Thank you so much. Cảm ơn.
Anh thử đi cho nào.
Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. It really helps to keep us going. Find the links below to our Patreon and social media, and we'll see you soon.